Hi, welcome back to Flipping Pages, Stirring Sauces. My gratitude and tawada to those of you who have liked, subscribed, and shared. I wanted to talk about the protest that happened in Ottawa and the lies that have been told by the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and others that a lot of Canadians have swallowed up and believe. But today, I'm not going to be talking about that. I'm going to be talking about racism and the war within the war that is going on between Russia and Ukraine. I don't have notes today because I will be speaking from the heart. And this story starts with my grandmother, Cicely Caroletta Sims. I know that your soul is at peace. No, people might wonder what talking about my grandmother has to do with racism. My grandmother, as far as I'm concerned, was the wealthiest woman on earth. And people who know her or knew her in her younger days would say, what is she talking about? See, my grandmother in her younger days didn't have physical wealth. The wealth that I'm talking about is a different kind of wealth. My grandmother raised her 4 children on her own and a stepson. And when your stepson goes out of your way to visit you, you know that you're a good mother to that stepson. When that stepson comes and visits you in your last days and sings with you and rub your foot or rub your feet, massage your feet and whisper kind words to you, you know that you are a good stepmother to that stepson. And that's who my grandmother was. She was a very wealthy woman. And later on in life, though she wasn't financially rich as a young person, later on in life, she lived in luxury because the 4 children she raised did not turn their backs on her. They made sure that she had everything she needed. And my grandmother lived in, I would have to say, luxury in her last days. She had a very nice house. She owned her own property. It wasn't a very big property, but it was hers nonetheless. And her children built for her a very nice house on that property. And when her children offered to pay for maid services for her to take care of her in her old age, she turned it down. She washed her own clothes, she cooked her own food, she cleaned her own house. And she said, all I want is just a little company, somebody to talk to. And with my grandmother, doesn't matter if you were 15 or 50. If you said something disrespectful in front of her, you'd get a swift backhand. And she was that way until 6 weeks before her death. See, 6 weeks before my grandmother went to sleep, she suffered a stroke, 2 strokes actually. The first one was a mild one. And then the second one was a severe one, which caused her not to be able to speak and caused her not to be able to move. But when people came to visit her and sing some of her favorite songs, I didn't see it for myself, but I heard the look on her face. She just smiled because that's all she could do. And her stepson was one of those people who visited. And I heard when she saw him, the smile on her face was so big. And my grandmother, if my grandmother had 3 of her grandchildren with her, and one of the neighbors came and said, Auntie Madame or Sister Sims, can you watch this child for me for a couple hours while I go run this errand? They knew my grandmother would not say no. It doesn't matter what my grandmother had to do. She wasn't going to say no. And mind you, that person would probably show up without extra clothes or without food for that child. And my grandmother, I remember a situation where I was with my grandmother and 3 other children. They were not related to her. And my grandmother had 1 banana, and she cut that 1 banana in 5 equal parts. Everybody got the same amount, including her. And if that person who left their child with my grandmother didn't come back for 2 weeks, that person could live for those 2 weeks confidently knowing that their child would be fed, clothed, and well taken care of. You see, when I'm judging my grandmother as being the wealthiest woman on earth, I was not judging her based on her material wealth. I'm judging her based on the content of her character. Just because I was her grandchild, I didn't get favored. I didn't get special treatment. I was treated exactly the same as the other 3 children she was caring for that didn't belong to her. So, what does my grandmother have to do with racism? My grandmother didn't look at people differently. And if those 3 children she was caring for happened to be white or Indian or Chinese, it wouldn't make a difference to her. She would treat us all the same. That was my grandmother. I remember the first time I brought the father of my children to my home in Jamaica. He looked around and he said, "My gosh, you guys have a gold mine here, and you don't even realize it. You guys walked away from all this beauty and live in Canada? This is paradise." I never saw it as paradise. I never saw it as a gold mine. It was my home where I was born and where I grew up. But he saw it differently. And he said, "I didn't realize you guys were so wealthy." I never thought of myself as wealthy. So it depends on how you judge wealth. It depends on what is wealthy to you. When my nephew visited our home in Jamaica for the first time, he was born here. He said, "Granddad, all of this belongs to us. We're rich. I didn't know we were rich." It all depends on how you judge richness and wealth. And the pursuit of a good education. That is what caused my father to uproot his family from Jamaica and took us to Canada. See, my father got a chance to visit Canada. And while he was visiting here, he found out about the education system. They told him that the education system in Canada was free from cradle to grave, which is not exactly true. And my father, who every decision that he makes with his children in mind, decided that he was gonna live here, stay here, and bring his children here so that we could have a part of that good education system. I'm not sure that the education system here is better than it is in Jamaica. The difference is education in Jamaica is very expensive. And my father had 8 children to educate. So if Canada could give us a better education, and he had the opportunity to do that, he was going to take advantage of that opportunity. A lot of African students and some Jamaican students ended up in the Ukraine because education there is cheaper than it is in their countries. They were not there getting a handout. They were there for an education that was paid for. And before the war broke out, some of them had made plans to return home to their countries. They had bought plane tickets. And on the same day they were scheduled to leave, that's when Ukraine was attacked by Russia. And a lot of people are talking about the Ukrainians, how resilient they are, and how wonderful they are, and how good they are. And mainstream media is painting this wonderful picture of the Ukrainians. And I too was rooting for Ukraine because I saw Russia as the aggressor, until you see the Jamaican students in Ukraine. And now people are saying, oh, the Jamaican government secured their return. No. Mark Golding, the official opposition to Andrew Holness' government, personally paid for and secured the return of those Jamaican citizens who were studying in the Ukraine. Mark Golding personally paid for that. And they were on a bus heading towards the Polish border. And they were taken off that bus. A bus that was paid for to take them to the Polish border. They were taken off that bus and they had to walk to the Polish border. And thankfully, because their passage was bought and paid for, and arrangements were made for them to reach safety. That was done. But some of the African students were not so lucky. Their countries didn't afford them the same accommodations as Mark Golding did for the Jamaican students, and so they were left on their own. And when they got to the border, actually, they had to fight to get on trains, and they had to fight to get on buses. Some of them were kicked off of trains, some of them were kicked off of buses, and some of them had to walk to the Polish border. And they were outside for 2 to 3 days. No food, no water, no warm clothing. Men and women, black men and black women, they were in the cold for 2 to 3 days. No food, no proper clothing, because some of them just grabbed their documents and ran. And I guess they expected to be treated like human beings. And they were not. And as I said, I judged my grandmother by the content of her character and not by her physical wealth. And I just want to share something. Just want to share something with all of you. But I have to just bear with me. I should have done this earlier. But I didn't, so just bear with me. Or maybe I can pause this. I think I'll just pause it. Just bear with me. And let me pause this and find what I need to find. And then I'll come back. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. And I just want to play for you something that is going on with our Black brothers and sisters in Ukraine.
Have to make this video, but mainstream media is not talking about this. So if I don't bring it to you all won't know about it. Yesterday I did a couple of videos talking about how worldwide individuals, everyday individuals, states, countries, organizations across the board were coming together in support of the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people against Russia and Vladimir Putin. And while we're all collectively praying and coming together for the Ukrainian people are leaving Africans to die. In that video, you can clearly see the Ukrainian people locking arms to prevent the Africans from being able to get on trains. Those trains are taking people to safety. It is infuriating. It is hurtful. It is disappointing. It is denigrating. And it is demeaning. And mainstream media is not talking about this. While we are all in support of fighting for freedom, Ukrainians are doing the opposite when it comes to Africans. And it doesn't end there. That video was taken at the Poland-Ukrainian border, where there's many reports that the borders are wide open, but not for Africans. After much begging and pleading, they finally let that group of Africans in. But there's several other videos where Africans are left sitting at the border in freezing temperatures, stranded. When we talk about racism and hatred for black people, it's not a USA thing. It's a global thing.
I would now like to talk about my own experiences with racism. My children are biracial. They identify themselves as black, and that makes things a little easier for them because that is how the world sees them, as black. And when they're questioned about their ethnic makeup, even though they were born in Canada, they say they're Jamaican Canadians. You see, they don't see me as a Canadian because I wasn't born here. They see me as a Jamaican because I was born in Jamaica. And they see their father as a Canadian because he was born here. And my children tend to not even remember that their father is born of Maltese immigrants. They tend to relate more to the Jamaican side of things because I made a conscious and purpose decision to let them not forget or neglect their Jamaican heritage. And that was catapulted by an incident that happened. You see, whenever I got angry with my children, I always reverted to my Jamaican language, which we call patois. And it got to the point where my children, in their casual conversation, them and I would sometimes speak Jamaican to each other. And I remember one day we were conversing in Jamaican patois, And their father said to them, "I don't want you talking that mumbo jumbo." I had to check him. And I had to make it very clear to him. I didn't do it in front of our children. I checked him later on. I had to make it very clear to him that what they were speaking is not mumbo jumbo. I had to make it very clear to him that what they were speaking is a part of my culture, my language, that I'm very much proud of, and not ashamed of. And so I made it a point to speak to them in that language as often as I could, and to make sure they knew how to speak it inside and out. My children are trilingual. They speak English, they speak French, and they speak Jamaican patois. And the younger one speaks a little bit of Punjabi, because growing up, most of his friends were Punjabis. So he could have a conversation in Punjabi. But anyway, at some point later on, another time, their father and we were having a discussion about my brothers. And he said something very negative. To this day, I have not said a word to him about what he had said. And I will never repeat what he had said. And no, he didn't refer to them with the N-word. But in that instance, I realized that even though he claimed to love me, he would never look at me as an equal, because he has these bias within him that came out in that conversation. And it was after Big Pharma did their thing with him. But Big Pharma could only bring that out of him if it was already in him. And there was another time when he made another reference, which was further confirmation that it doesn't matter how much some people say they love you. They have this racist bias that is taught. And it stays with them. It stays with them because that is what is taught. When he told his aunt that he was getting married, his aunt asked him who he was marrying. And he said, Arlene. And his aunt said to him, why don't you find a nice white girl to marry? And he said to his aunt, because I found a nice black girl to marry. And when he told his father that he was going to marry me, his father tried to talk him out of marrying me. And he told me this. I never said a word to his father about what he had said. I never said a word to his aunt about what she had said. And what he had said to his father is, when you get to know her, you will love her as much as I love her. And the day we got married, his father, when we came out of the church, his father came and he took my face in his hands like this. And he kissed me on my forehead, and then he kissed me on both cheeks. And he welcomed me into the family. And then he said to me, I am sorry. And I said to him, sorry for what, Dad? And he said, you called me Dad. And after I married his son, he treated me with the utmost respect. He made me feel loved. And he was very generous with my oldest child. He died while I was pregnant with my second child. And he always made me feel welcomed. And I don't know if the way he treated me and how overprotective he became of me when he found out I was pregnant was genuine. It felt genuine. But I don't know for certain. I don't know for certain. But I know that racism is taught. I know that it is taught. I see little children playing together, all colors, and they don't care if you're black, white, pink, purple. They don't care. When I was in high school, we had the black people at one table, the Chinese people at one table, the white people at one table, the Indian people at one table. And Arlene would sit at every one of those tables. I would go to the black table and I would sit there for 10 minutes, then I would go to the Chinese table, the Indian table. Because I didn't care. I didn't see color. I didn't see color. And I remember I was dating a Jewish guy. And we went to buy fruits. Next door, there were two fruit markets beside each other. And one was owned by an Italian, and the other was owned by a Jewish guy. And we walk past the store that was owned by the Italian guy. And his produce looked a lot better. And it was cheaper. And I said to my boyfriend at the time, you know, the produce over there looks better. And it's cheaper. And he said to me, yeah, babe, but that fruit market is owned by an Italian. This one is owned by a Jew. And we have to keep the money in our community. So it doesn't matter if that guy's produce was 10 times fresher and 10 times cheaper. I would still buy from this guy because this guy is of my community. And I thought to myself, wow, I never looked at things that way. I never looked at the color of a person before I go in to their establishment to make a purchase. And I remember later on when I opened my own business and we had to have a sign on the business made a certain way. And I was asking the business owners who already had their sign up, like, who did your sign and how much did you pay? And they would tell me, and then they would say, oh, I paid $3,000 to get my sign done. So I would contact the people that did their sign because they gave me their information. And they were quoting me $6,000 to get my sign done. And I would say to them, you're quoting me $6,000 to get my sign done, but these other individuals who referred me to you paid $3,000. And then there was a Nigerian lady who had also opened a business. It was a hair business in the area, and she had her sign up. And I asked her, how much did you pay to get your sign up? And who did it? She told me who did it. And she told me she paid $6,000. And I realized, oh, there's one price for these set of people, and there's another set of price for the black people. And I remember I carried on my business. I wasn't going to pay $6,000 to get my sign up when the going price was $3,000. I remember one day this Chinese guy came in and he said to me, why don't you have your sign up? And I said, oh, because I'm being ripped off. I'm being asked to pay $6,000 for my sign to be done, while all these other people paid $3,000 and my sign is no different than theirs. And we got talking and he said to me, you know, my best friend is black, and he's a distributor just like myself, and he is selling his stuff for $5 cheaper per box than I am. And the Chinese supermarkets will not buy from him. And I said, why? And the guy said to me, because he's not Chinese. And even if its prices were $10 cheaper, they still wouldn't buy from him. And the neighborhood that I had my business in was in a predominantly South Asian neighborhood. And the South Asians would come in and say to me, if you put a South Asian girl in here to do the cash and to take the orders, you'll be a millionaire in no time. And I thought to myself, why do I need to do that? And I asked him, and he said, they're not going to support your business because you're black. And I thought, wow. And I decided then that I wasn't going to do any kind of business with anybody who didn't want to do business with me. And I remember this South Asian guy came in and he wanted me to advertise my business with the company he worked for. And I told him straight up, I'm not doing any business with you. And he said, why? And I said, you see outside, I don't have a sign up. And he said, yeah, why don't you have a sign on your business? And I said, because your brothers are charging me twice as much to put my sign up as they're charging other people from your community. And I said, I will not do business with anyone from your community until my sign is up. And I'm not paying any more than $3,000 to put my sign up. So I said to him, you make that happen for me, and I'll do business with you. Within a week, my sign was up for $3,000. And I did advertise with him because I'm a woman of my word. People are taught certain things that stays with you forever. My mother, when we came to Canada from Jamaica, they brought the 5 oldest first, and the 3 younger ones were left in Jamaica. And dinner time was a ritualistic time for me. My mother would have us set the table in the English traditional way. One of us was responsible for the placemats. One was responsible for placing the knife properly. One was responsible for placing the fork properly. One was responsible for placing the glass properly. And one was responsible for placing the dessert spoon properly. She took care of the placing of the plate. And we had to eat with a knife and fork. Everybody had to sit at the table and eat with a knife and fork. And a little side thing here. The first time I met my father-in-law, it was at a restaurant. And when I picked up my knife and fork and I started eating with my knife and fork, he was so impressed. His daughters who were sitting there with their arms on the side of the table and eating with their fingers and putting their hands in the food, and they were all doing that, eating with their hands and eating whatever. I was doing what was an everyday thing in my house, which came naturally to me. And he was so impressed by that. He asked his son what family I was from, if I was from a high-class, rich family. Yes, I was from the wealthiest family in the world. And so when my mother set the table, not only were we required to display proper etiquette while eating, if the fork touched your teeth and she heard it, you would be removed from the table. If you cut something on your plate and the knife made contact with the plate as if you cut the plate, you would be removed from the table. We were required to display proper table manners. And I can't remember if when we lived in Jamaica, she was as stringent with the table manners. But I know that my father always ate with a knife and fork. And if my father ate with a knife and fork, we were probably required to eat with a knife and fork as well. And those principles stayed with me because they were taught to me. And while my children were still sitting in high chairs and eating out of plastic plates, I taught them to eat with a knife and fork. And my children, until today, still eat with a knife and fork. Do not serve them their food without a knife and fork. If you give them just a fork, they will ask you for a knife. And they don't care where they're sitting. Sometimes they take their food to their rooms. And I've come upstairs and I've seen my youngest son propped up on his bed with his plate on his belly, and he's using a knife and fork to eat. Because that's what he was taught by me, who was taught by my parents. So the behaviors that we display are the behaviors that we're taught. Racism is taught. It is taught. It doesn't just happen out of nowhere. And it stays with those who teach it. And this is specifically to my Black brothers and sisters in African nations. Deuteronomy tells us no one will save us. We have to save ourselves. So we need to make sure that our children can afford an education in our own countries so that they don't have to go to other countries and put up with the abuse that they're putting up with in the Ukraine right now at the Poland border and elsewhere in Ukraine. Those of us who are able to do so should ensure that our Black brothers and sisters who are less fortunate can get an education in the land of our birth or in the land we call home. Every time there's a crisis, there's abuse of Black people, in particular Africans all over the world. When this pandemic first started, they were abused in China. They were abused in China. And now, this planned war that is taking place, because this is all political. It's all political. And it's all about who controls what ports and who controls the gas. Our brothers and sisters are being abused again, thousands of miles away from home. And for you rich brothers and sisters out there, instead of buying 1,001 cars, these fancy huge homes, and but buying these material things, maybe those of you who are not doing so, because I know that some are, should be looking at how you can help your less fortunate brothers and sisters to obtain a good education without having to rely on other countries to provide that cheap education for us. I know a lot of Canadian doctors are trained at the University of the West Indies. Why are our black brothers and sisters going to these nations that don't care about them, spending with their money with them for an education? Why can't people put together and secure education for the less fortunate? Why do Jamaicans have to go to the Ukraine to get an education? There are a lot of wealthy Jamaicans who can buy scholarships for Jamaicans. Melanated people, you need to come together and support each other and keep the money in your community. We need to start looking at the type of business we're spending our money with. And we need to make a change. We need to do things differently. We need to start agreeing and speaking with one voice and keeping our money in our community. Stop buying these name brand stuff. And look at what we should be looking at. Yes, I'm a very wealthy woman. Not physical, not financially wealthy. But my grandmother gave me a ton load of wealth. And when my eyes are closed, I hope that I will be judged by the content of my character and not my financial wealth. I give you my peace. I give you my ahab. I am at peace with myself. I am at peace with my world. And I am at peace with my Creator, my Awa, the giver of breath, the Most High, the Ancient of Days, Yahweh, Hahaya. I give you my Baruch. Shalom.